Governor, firstly, thanks very much for taking time out to talk to us. Now, to begin with, the immediate question that springs to anyone's mind is why you opted for a CRR cut, because most bankers we speak to believe that the liquidity deficit in the system is temporary in nature, so why not have just done OMOs to address the liquidity tightness? Why a CRR cut?
First of all, thank you, George, for this opportunity. I appreciate being on 18 now. Yes, yesterday's action of cutting the CRR, there were two questions posed actually, one which you did not ask, one which you did ask. Why CRR and not a repo rate cut? And second, why did you have to do CRR when you could have addressed liquidity constraints through other measures? So let me answer the first question, which is that our monetary policy action has had to contend with difficult growth inflation challenge, which was particularly more complex this time round. Inflation had tended up in September. Growth has moderated, although the first quarter number was slightly better than the last quarter of last year. So we had to maintain the repo rate where it was to signal our anti-inflationary stance. Now you see repo rate is at 8% and the inflation for September was 7.8%. It's marginally positive in real terms, but it might trend negative over the next few months as inflation goes up. So our action was aimed at ensuring that we maintain an anti-inflationary stance through our repo rate, but through a CRR cut, maintain comfortable liquidity so that interest rates do not go up higher than they should be in order to ensure flow of credit to productive sectors. Now, coming to your question about whether the constraints on liquidity are temporary or more sustained. The liquidity constraint now is due to a structural factor, the wedge between credit and deposit growth, and some frictional factors, which is the build-up in government cash balances and the demand for currency on account of the festival season. We believe that these constraints will persist for a few more months, and we thought a more appropriate solution would be to cut the CRR rather than do OMOs from time to time.
Sure. Now, you said, Governor, that the baseline scenario suggests a reasonable likelihood of further policy easing in the fourth quarter. But in the interim, what do you believe the upside risks to inflation are?
We've indicated them in our policy. First, there is the commodity prices, which have remained firm in spite of the global growth being quite sluggish, possibly because of the liquidity that is there going into speculation of commodities. Then there is the suppressed inflation. Government has done well to adjust the prices of electricity and of diesel, but there is still a lot of suppressed inflation there. And as that comes out, that will put pressure on inflation. Then there is food. Food price inflation has been in double digits. Protein inflation has been even higher. And even food products inflation of sugar and grain mill products has been high. And that requires a supply response to ease that. Then there is the wage structure. Rural and urban wages have increased without commensurate increase in productivity. So that's put pressure on inflation. This is perhaps for the first time that wages are driving prices than the other way around. And finally, there is the exchange rate. The rupee has depreciated, notwithstanding the slight appreciation in the month of September. In the fiscal year, rupee depreciated by about 7% plus, I would think. So to the extent that rupee depreciates, there will be pressure on inflation.
So now, while you have indicated that you might ease policy rates in the fourth quarter, you haven't exactly painted a very rosy picture of the economy. You've revised the growth outlook downwards from 6.5 to 5.8. The inflation outlook has been revised upwards from 7 to 7.5. What do you believe the risks to the economy in the next few months could possibly be?
First is the global uncertainty and the transmission of that uncertainty to our domestic economy. That's been happening over the last 4 years and is continuing to happen even now. So we need more certain global environment. The second is that investment must pick up. Domestic investment in India, and foreign investment into India must pick up. So all the supply constraints and the procedures and formalities for approvals and permissions to get cracking with project implementation. Then there is the concern about commodity prices firming up, which I spoke about earlier. That also will have an impact on inflation, on growth. We need commodity prices to be softened, and for our exchange rate, if it appreciates, that will help us on the import side. And well, food has to, on agriculture side, we need to improve food output, especially of protein foods.
So now you've reiterated in your policy statement that the medium-term objective of the Reserve Bank of India remains to get inflation down to the 3% level. But would you agree that, we are a long way off from achieving that objective?
Well, I would agree with you to this extent that we are a little longer way off than we thought earlier. Inflation has been high over the last 2 years, and it continues to be high even today, and maybe even next year. So it's well above that 3% or indeed even 5%, which is, I believe, the tolerance level for the country. Notwithstanding that, I don't think we should give up that goal. And that goal is within the realm of possibility. We need to adhere to that goal, because we need to bring our inflation down to comparable to international levels so that our economy remains competitive. And I would say it's within the realm of possibility, because if we ease the supply constraints that I spoke about earlier, if fiscal consolidation is on track, if commodity prices stay soft, and if exchange rate remains stable, not volatile, I believe that it would be possible to get inflation down to our comfort level.
So essentially, Governor, the task of fighting inflation is not the RBI's alone, just based on what you said. The government will have to bear an equal responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. I've always maintained, and the Reserve Bank always maintains, that reducing inflation and raising growth is a shared responsibility of the government and the Reserve Bank. And indeed, the Finance Minister said that too yesterday in his statement.
Sure. Now, you've listed out among some of the challenges to inflation, suppressed inflation, which is slowly coming to the fore. You've talked about, wage inflation, both at the rural and the urban level, which continues to remain at elevated levels. Both these factors together, coupled and including many other multiple factors which have played on inflation, do they all seem to suggest that, somewhere while the RBI can target 3% in the medium term and live with 7 to 7.5% in the immediate term, somewhere we need to get used to the idea of, or rather we need to concede to the fact that 6 to 6.5% is possibly the new normal for inflation?
I wouldn't exactly put it that way, that we are settling for a new normal, because inflation has been high, owing to structural as well as cyclical factors. But what I'm saying is that all these factors can be resolved. I mentioned all of them, which is suppressed inflation, fiscal deficit, a stable exchange rate, food supply improving, removing infrastructure constraints. So if we get going on this, I think inflation can come down faster than we now believe. So we don't have to settle for an assertion that 6 to 7% is the new normal. Although I would concede your argument to the extent that 6 to 7% inflation is where it might be for the next 1.5 years.